Hi, my name is Craig Frayne. The title of my paper is Multilevel Discourse Analysis, a methodological response to the ecological turn in ICC research. So debates and discourses about the human relation to the natural world are all around us. We're amid the most rapid period of natural resource development and infrastructure expansion in human history. My research studies these discourses from the perspective of applied linguistics. Specifically, I'm interested in intercultural pragmatics and the ideas of meaning as use and language games in these contexts. So this paper discusses a methodological framework I use to structure corpus-based research in this field. So this research aims to be multi-level, interdisciplinary, and holistic. Such holistic frameworks that communication scholars have used in the past include the socio-ecological model, or meso-analysis, or similar approaches. However, I've found that these approaches do not necessarily integrate the multiple factors that I was looking for in my research. For example, I'm really interested in the political and economic aspects, as well as the linguistic aspects, cultural. I found that the application of these models was intended more for social scientific inquiry, which is precisely what the intent was behind them. But they don't necessarily touch upon the humanistic and scientific, natural scientific dimensions of environmental debates. So I found the need to modify them, take them as a basis, but develop the idea further. To set out my research, I began to develop levels of analysis by considering the history of intercultural communication research. I argue that what are now called the cognitive sciences influenced early ICC research and remain crucial to the field. This is not to suggest that links between cognitive science and intercultural communication were explicit at the time. So now we're referring to back in the 50s and 60s when ICC began. I suggest that these links are more likely a reflection of the shared intellectual antecedents in anthropology and linguistics at the time. Arguably, cognitivist approaches to the mind led to overly reductive understandings of human communication and culture. Beginning in the 80s, ICC research began to be influenced by the rise of postmodernism, social constructionism, which led to the critical turn of the 1990s. I argue that one drawback of this, while I see it as a necessary and positive development, one drawback may have been that intercultural communication scholarship developed in a way that may have precluded multi-level interactions involving cognition. So the earlier work in the 50s and 60s may not have been integrated with this new critical turn. Finally, there's been more recent work, which could be called an ecological turn in the field. This is often framed as an extension of critical discourse studies, analyzing the relation between language and the natural world. So even in this very brief history, we can see how ICC research has ranged from microanalysis of mental states and the early cognitivist underpinnings to the critical framework, so that's looking at socio-economic factors, and finally, a more recent turn to the ecological context. The present challenge, as I see it, for my research at least, is the integration of these various approaches. I think they all have something very valuable to offer, and excluding one or the other would not enrich or benefit the research. So this paper in response proposes discourse analysis as a methodology for analyzing human communication, which is consistent with the critical turn and critical discourse analysis. But rather than exclusively focus on that critical discourse analysis framework, a multi-level discourse analysis is proposed. So in this multi-level framework, the higher macro level is the ecological context, as indicated by the ecological turn in ICC research. The lowest micro level is cognition, so going back to the earliest stages in ICC research and the cognitivist underpinnings. And I'm proposing the meso levels, two meso levels, as cultural and socio-economic. So in this, the ecological level is discourse about nature and, in a very general sense, anything about the more than human world. So this includes discourses about ecology in a scientific sense, but this is important for this research is that it's not exclusively about the scientific definition of ecology. It could also include human subjective meanings and interpretations that they assign to the natural world. The cultural level, I'm embedding into the ecological level. The philosophical and the theoretical justification for that could be argued. For more details, you can look at the paper or get in contact with me. But the cultural level are expressions of identity, values, worldviews, people communicating about who they are, either directly or indirectly. So cultural discourse analysis is the framework that I've drawn on to understand this level. The socio-economic is what I'd associate with the critical tradition in intercultural communication and critical discourse analysis. So it's related to material inequalities, to economics, institutions, power relations, putting a critical lens on these, of course. And again, maybe arguably, this concerns aspects of social existence that do not express cultural identity. So I am proposing that there's a difference between cultural and critical or socioeconomic type discourse. And again, that requires obviously a lot more justification than we have time here to cover. But I have found that distinction does lead to more thorough analysis in practice. Finally, the cognitive level more directly relates to cognitive linguistics. So it's about mental representations, cognitive frames. So things like metaphor, implicature, other insights from cognitive linguistics, and nonverbal communication as well is crucial to this level. So this framework aims to strike a balance between interpretive and critical approaches. I've found that by isolating the socioeconomic and cultural analyses, the researcher is compelled to take both approaches, interpretive and critical. It could be cultural, meaning-centered, and critical, to take both of these into account and to discuss them and identify them in language. A methodological challenge to this approach is obviously you're integrating a lot of factors. The data requirements, so the linguistic data requirements, are a challenge. And this research, as I've presented, is a basis for a larger corpus linguistic study. So I went in to the corpora and applied this framework to various statements. And obviously, in practice, it's not one or the other statement or one or the other level of analysis. They blend together in discourse in complex ways. However, that said, this approach can structure the analysis and lead to some insights. So that's a very brief summary. Thank you for your attention, and please reach out if you have any feedback or questions. Always very welcome. And I hope to have some discussions. Thank you very much.